This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is up on Center Stage, the show about the arts and the artists behind their work. What defines a writer? Well, Annie Lamott, in her book on writing in life, entitled Bird by Bird, says the following. For some of us, books are as important as almost anything else on earth. What a miracle it is that out of these small, rigid squares of paper unfolds world after world after world, worlds that sing to you, comfort and quiet or excite you. Books help us to understand who we are. Well, my guest today knows all too well about worlds and words that sing to us. Author Kate Manning has once again touched a nerve with her new book, Gilded Mountain, just released this month. It is the story of a feisty young woman, Sylvie Pelletier, who in 1907, when transplanted from Vermont to the wilds of the Colorado mountains, finds her personal voice and passion in her dedication to family and the rights of the oppressed. In this case, addressing the rights of those who worked the marble quarries during a time when the rights and safety of the workers were non-existent. Author Christina Baker Klein says of Gilded Mountain, an epic story of love and perseverance, while Erik Larson adds, Gilded Mountain is brilliant. Kate Manning is the author of the critically acclaimed novels My Notorious Life and White Girl. She is a former documentary television producer and winner of 2 Emmy Awards. She has written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times Book Review, Time, Glamour, and The Guardian, just to name a few. She has taught creative writing at Bard High School, early college in Manhattan, and lives with her family in New York City. Kate Manning, it is an honor and joy to have you back with me on Center Stage. Welcome.
Thank you, Pamela. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and I look forward to this conversation. Thanks.
Excellent, because I know you've been having many so far on this book. You have been a busy girl.
Well, it's been fun. You never know when you are cooking up a novel over the course of this one took place over 10 years. You just never know if it will find its way in the world. And it seems like this one is, and I couldn't be happier about it. It's great. It's great.
Kate, tell me, is that what it's like for you? You know, you were giving birth to this story, these people, these ideas. I mean, is that what it's like over a 10-year period when you start a novel? I mean, is it that kind of process?
I think lots of writers will compare it to, putting a child out into the world. You watch it go off and hope that it makes its way. But yes, this novel actually was started maybe in 2011, 2012, and lots of life interruptions, things happen, and stopping and starting and changing things around. But it was actually sold to the wonderful Scribner publishing team in the right before lockdown. And that was, quite a different experience. And so the publication date kept getting pushed off and pushed ahead. And it's actually great that it's coming out now and we can do things in person a little bit more. But yes, I have said it's like being pregnant for 3 or 4 years. Really, because there's so much buildup. When's the book coming? When's the book coming out? When's it coming out? And it's out now.
I was interested when I went to your book signing. It was just last evening in Darien, Connecticut. And someone asked that question, what is it like when you finally hand that book over? And I was sitting there thinking, my gosh, you give birth to this precious child and then you give it away. And you must be so fearful of rewrites, of the criticism. I mean, are you able to give it away that freely and not worry?
No, I think there's 2 things that happen. Once an editor asked me, do you like being edited? And I said, well, do you like going to the dentist? I mean, you, you have to go to the dentist and you need an editor. And a lot of times everyone needs an editor, because particularly when you sit with a project for that long and you read it so many times, you really lose perspective and you have no idea how someone will react. I have a couple of readers that have been reading my pages for years, and I read their pages, and we swap back and forth. But because we're friends, you have to wonder that that they are not giving the fine-tuned attention that an actual editor will give a manuscript. And my editor, Kara Watson at Scribner, has, and my literary agent too, who's an editor, has we've all gone over this manuscript many, many times, and it's painstaking, but it's worth it. It's really worth it. So yes, but on the other hand, of course, sending it out, you just hope that the readers who've vetted it are right, and that it's working, and that it's good, and it's very nerve-wracking.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Like any performer, like myself, if I'm singing and we have those imperfection moments,
Yes.
your mind still goes back to those and thinks, I could have done it differently, And I'm
Yes.
sure for any writer that also happens, but it's in black and white.
Yes, I think there's a lot of common ground between performers like yourself and writers and all members of the arts. I always think, though, that I think of this line that I've known, had tacked to my bulletin board in college, a line from, I think, a Stanley Kunitz poem, where he says, "We learn as the thread plays out that we belong less to what flatters us than to what scars." And so, of course, your mind goes back to that moment where you forgot your line, or you didn't hit the note, or you pick up your book and you look at the page and you go, "Oh, I wish I had changed that." And I think, I want to say good performers, good writers are perfectionists in that way, because it's never quite what you want. It could always be better.
Exactly. Are you able to sleep at night with that? I mean,
Yes, sure.
yeah, that's
Sure.
great. That's wonderful, because I know a great many writers who can't. And, it's just that thing that's within us. But that's fantastic.
Well, okay, I'm a terrible sleeper, but
Yeah.
I live with that idea. Sure.
But I think the beauty here too is that you have such a balanced existence with your family, with your husband. I mean, you're very much a mom and this force in the creative world at the same time. And I always love to see that kind of Libran balance, I would call it. And long may that last for you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my kids are grown up. And I really, I had a full-time job before having kids. And I always thought, well, while they take their naps, I'll write my novels, which wasn't a really workable idea. But I think staying home to raise my kids and writing while they were in school really helped me establish a good routine and a discipline and a time, an idea that if you want to be serious about it, you can't do everything. You can't, you really need to dedicate yourself to it as a serious pursuit.
Right. No, I get it. So let's talk about that process if we can a little bit. I'm intrigued. I speak to a lot of filmmakers and they talk about, their outlines and their storyboards. I saw you at your book signing last night using visual images to help us recreate an idea of the setting. It was fantastic, of Colorado, back in the day. It was really quite vivid. So do you storyboard yourself? Are you inspired off a visual cue, so to speak?
Yes, I would say so. My mother is a wonderful painter. My grandmother was a painter. My uncle was a painter. There's a lot of artists in my family. So yes, visual images really fuel my writing. And particularly in this case, this is the slideshow that I hope to present at Greenwich Library coming up. These images was sparked by the book was sparked by an old photograph that I found in my parents' attic. And it showed a bunch of people, 100 people in sepia tones, standing in front of a mountain range in Marble, Colorado in 1915. And I asked my father about it, and he didn't know much about it, but he thought one of the people in the picture was his grandfather, i.e. my great-grandfather. And he said, yeah, I think he had something to do with quarrying the marble for the Lincoln Memorial. And I
Why?
was taken aback. I did not know this history, and he really didn't know much about it at all.
Huh.
And I just thought the picture was interesting, and it was kind of cool to have a connection to that monument, which, after all, stands for binding up the wounds of a tattered, divided country. But I didn't think much about it for a long time. And then as my dad got older, I said, I'm going to find out more. And all this time I'd been picturing a quarryman, a guy with a pickaxe. But no, it turned out that my ancestor was actually the president of the company that supplied the stone for the Lincoln Memorial and the Tomb of the Unknowns. And so when I started to explore the history of this place and this time, I actually went back a decade before he landed there. And in the 1910s, there were so many stories and pictures that really made my jaw drop to the floor. Pictures of women and children, but mostly workers, men, working in this vast white cave, giant blocks of marble the size of grand pianos or shipping containers dangling in midair, shacks buried to the roof in snow, but people living in them, digging out like moles from their burrows at 9,000 feet of altitude, and in sub-zero temperatures in the Colorado mountains.
Yeah.
And I was so taken and so riveted with a couple of these pictures where I was just searching them, looking, where were the women? And I finally found sort of shadowy figure in the doorway of one of the cabins. And it really strikes me all the time looking at history that if you want to tell a woman's story, if you want to know what it was like for ordinary people, you have to read between the lines and you have to look in the shadows. So I started to write about a young woman in Quarrytown who's dreaming of a different existence. And I wasn't that interested in my ancestors' story, really. It was more like how did people live in these rugged conditions? I mean, they were incredibly tough.
I can't imagine. So actually, but it was the historical element of your family that really lured you into this world.
Right. It was. And if I hadn't seen that long picture, I wouldn't have known any of it. I'd, never heard anything about a connection to Colorado at all. But then when I started researching, I just kept finding these photographs and these old newspapers and archives and folksy stories and stories about strikes and labor unrest and immigrants and the way the West was settled and formed, and saw many parallels between the kinds of things that we're going through today, and so
Absolutely.
it was very rich material.
Yeah, so let's look at Amazon now and make a comparison. Or it's interesting, what was old is now new. We come around, don't we?
Yes, I think so.
And who would have thought fascism would have a place in our country right now as well, which is a little frightening.
Well, it's interesting to hear you use that word, and I think a lot of us have been reluctant to name it that, but I think it's upon us, and we must look at it as if that's what's happening. And for example, you talk about everything old is new again, and when you look at the past, it helps you understand the cycles of history and the pendulum swing. But to study it is to say, name it, call it what it is. Say that there's a wealth gap. Say that billionaires are controlling 98% of the wealth, and 98% of the people have to share 2% of it. And so in this period, 1907, 1908, you see so many of the same things. You see a financial crash. You see women don't have the vote. You see this newspaper war in this tiny town in which one newspaper is controlled by the company, and the company is writing all these reports and not, and then this other pro-labor newspaper run by a very fearless woman editor who suffered very severe consequences for speaking out against the company. Yes. And when I saw that story, I wanted to use part of it as in the novel. So she's a model for Sylvie. In some ways, I named Sylvie after her. Her name is Smith. So
I know, I love that. I love that Sylvia Smith becomes, our heroine, really. So walk us into this story. Introduce the story to us for our listeners.
Well, if you had to do what you call an elevator pitch, you'd have to, I could say it a couple of ways. I think it's, I think of it in some ways as the education of Sylvie Pelletier. She's the daughter of French Canadian immigrants. And this is her looking back at 2 years in a town that I named Moonstone, Colorado. It's a fictional town. And it's based on images and history of actually Marble and Redstone, Colorado, and some other episodes in Colorado history. And so she begins her education in the rugged quarry town of this place, and she finds a way to get herself apprenticed to a radical newspaper editor. And yet she's very drawn, as you all are, to fine things and luxury. And she sees the opulence of this manor house in town and wants to know what that's like. And she gets herself a job in the local castle and meets all kinds of characters who are drawn there from Europe, and kings and countesses and all kinds of people like that. So another way I think of it is, hey, it's kind of like Downton Abbey set in the Rocky Mountains.
Here's our dynasty moment. Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
So she, it's also kind of a subverted Cinderella story for another thumbnail, because she's confronted with the choice, a life of ease or an adventure. And so she's got to decide between, she learns about right and wrong, really. She begins to form her values. And I always think about, I've said this before, but I was thinking a lot about E.L. Doctorow's well-known quote where he says that an historian will tell you what happened, but a novelist will tell you how it felt.
Yeah.
So that, I hope that the book wears its research lightly, but that by the end you'll know not just what happened, but how it felt.
And that is the whole purpose of you giving us that emotional response into this world. I have to tell you right now, I was really drawn to all the characters. I always feel, Kate, that if you into a good book, you'll feel them close to your bosom. And you want to go into their world, and you want to feel for them, and you want to have that empathy. And I certainly had that for several characters, but especially for Sylvie. I felt this young girl who's trying to figure life out, and she's stuck in the middle of nowhere. But yet she keeps her nose to the ground in a really interesting way. I mean, and you said, what was the phrase you used about her? That she's sharp-eyed, quick-witted.
Yeah, I think I said she's a sharp-eyed witness.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I think she was hard to write, Pam, because
really?
Because if you're being honest about what it was like for women, and still is to some degree, we are all trained to be quiet and to not say what we're thinking in many ways. And we understand that to say a word like, say, fascism, or to say abortion, or to say, I'm not being paid enough, or I would like some childcare, and to speak about it forcefully and knowledgeably, and is to risk being squelched and worse.
Yes.
And so Sylvie, particularly in those days and for throughout time, understands that if she speaks, and she could suffer grave consequences, and so could her family.
Right.
And
exactly.
So, her mother has always trained her, and the church has always trained her that complaints are the seeds of misery, and you don't speak. So for me, it was a balance between her presenting a face of the good girl
Hmm.
while also having very subversive thoughts, because she
Yes.
sees and has a growing awareness that, you know, like so many of us do, hey, it's not me, it's this systemic outside structural thing that's holding me back and not letting me talk or be myself.
And I thought you did a great job of that. In her internalization, you're constantly expressing, and through the book, she actually becomes more of owning her own truth. And to see that kind of maturity happen, and this fantastic woman really implode, physically in front of our eyes within your words is wonderful. I found her plucky, and I loved her good sense, and she followed her intuition, most of the time. And but you're right. So often when we've heard a woman's story, it's been told by a man. And
Mhm.
now you're giving the voice here. And Kate, you are a writer of great social conscience, as we've read in your other two books. Um, I find this really powerful coming from you. And there's a gentleness you have too when you unfold a story, even though it's been described as epic, this book, and I think it is, but also it's quite cruel. But one of the things I love about that is Sylvie sees the cruelty and wants to bring everyone's attention to it, even when it comes down to a donkey being mistreated. There's something really beautiful in the way you write. Um,
Thank you.
is there a similarity, or do you look to find a rhythm like akin to musical phrases when you write?
Oh, thank you for asking me that. And coming from you, I know you're a musician, so you would be tuned to that. I I look for a couple of things in a book, and of course the story, but a narrative voice is made out of strong sentences, and rhythms, and really tunes you into a person's interior life.
Right.
So yes, of course I think about the rhythms of a sentence, and I work on them for a long time. If they if any of them seem fluid, they're not. They really are, they come all out in a 1,000 word day if I'm lucky. But then I go back and back and back and forth and chop and cut and move and chop, and I really think that I read for the rhythm of a sentence and the musicality of a sentence. And I love to play with the English language because it is so rich and so full of idiomatic, funny expressions and great um, words that, come from languages all over the world. So it's great fun.
That's fantastic. So tell me this, do you when you get into your characters, do you go out and walk with them? Do you write letters to them? Do you crawl into their skin? I mean, I've never written a novel. To what level do writers go, Kate?
I don't know about others, but if you're an actor, as you are, and I used to do a lot of acting and miss it, I do try to inhabit a character, and I find myself sitting at my desk, like closing my eyes or making facial expression to try to feel that an emotion
Yeah.
in my body the way an actor might,
Yep.
um, and also just to use the specific or closely observed detail to carry emotion instead of saying, he felt or she felt or I felt, to make I don't know, a piece of kitchen equipment or an action of chopping an onion carry the feeling instead of explaining away uh, uh,
Interesting.
over and over again.
Very interesting. So tell me this, you talked about earlier in this interview about real life, kind of getting in the way sometimes of writing. How does that happen, Kate? I mean, are you able then to just put the book away for a while? Are you able to disengage, during that 10-year period? I guess is my main question here.
Well, I will say that during the 10-year period, we had a lot of family things going on. My dad died.
Oh, I'm
My
so sorry.
mom's house had a horrible house fire. And so we helped her rebuild it. And I was sort of the foreman of that job. And so there were lots of things like that. Plus, there was the pandemic, and other people made sourdough bread and learned Italian. And I wasn't one of them. But
Neither was I.
yeah. But in some ways, a book percolates along as you're doing the dishes or walking your dog or driving your kid to look at colleges. And it feels, I don't know, it's a tension that pulls at you. You always want to be, you feel bad unless you can get back to it. And then when you do, I mean, for me, I look at it and I think, what was this about anyway? And sometimes if you just have a day or two, it's not even worth doing because you need a big chunk of time to to get to it. And I really admire writers who have a hard, fast religious rule. Do not bother me from 7 in the morning until noon. I don't care what else is going on. I'm here, but I'm not one of those people. I just get pulled by family.
And how do your family handle it?
They put up with me. They tolerate me.
They know when to give you your space.
They do. Yeah. Yes. They're very, very supportive, which is great.
That's fantastic. Do you have like a sacred space in your house, which is yours to go to write? Or, can you just go out on your balcony and be happy?
Um, I, yes, I do. I have a great office. I have a great office and a desk and a printer and corkboard strips above my desk where I can tack things up, and all my files are there and my books that I can just pull down and check. So yeah, that's very important.
So I've got to ask this, and I ask this of all my guests.
Hmm.
When you're working on a big project like this, what is the more interesting aspect to you? Is it when you're really blessed with that inspirational idea in the beginning, when you're fleshing that out? Or is it when you're actually doing the labor of the work to make it happen?
I don't know. When you start a novel and when you're working on it, I always think of it as this sort of shimmering, elusive something that I'm trying to capture. And then the practicalities of working on it is like laying tile. I've a lot of writers that I know will say, I hate writing. I like having written. So you put in a good day and you feel like, okay, that was a good day. And sometimes, and I wouldn't say this happens a whole lot, you'll have a great day and it will just come right out and you'll get a page or 5 pages, or you wake up in the morning or the middle of the night and you write something down and you look at it the next day and you go, oh, this works. Most of the time you go, I can't even read this. So it depends. Yes, but that's a good question. I'd say
Very interesting.
having written and editing is important.
Editing is important. I find editing very hard. It almost makes me so anxious I can't sit in my own skin. That is the way I would describe it. But for you, I suppose it's just part and parcel of what you have to produce in the end. And
editing. I think a lot of young writers, when I've taught, a lot of writers just don't realize that editing is the half of it. You have to be able to look at your work, trim, make adjustments, sit back and see how the narrative is working, whether the characters are whole and real and organic. And so when I teach, sometimes when my students bring in their first paper,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to show them what editing is all about, and we do the
Mm-hmm.
editing class. I bring in a page and I hold it up, and it's full of red marks and lines and crossings out and arrows. And I say, okay, this page belongs to someone in this class. And don't feel bad if you get a page like this. I'm not going to say who it is right now, but I'll tell you at the end of the class after we talk about editing. But this is what you have to do, And they all look stricken and terrified. And at the end of the class, I say, okay, now I'm going to tell you whose it is. It's somebody in this class. And they all look terrified. And I hold it up and I say, it's mine. This is what I do to myself, because it's hard work. You gotta chop.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, Kate Manning, you are inspiring. And another inspiring novel, which you wrote when we last met, was My Notorious Life. I don't think a book has ever been more timely than now about women's reproductive rights. When last we spoke, you mentioned that perhaps it was going to be optioned for film in Hollywood. Has that happened? And how do you feel about the timely nature of My Notorious Life at this point?
Well, two things. The novel was optioned by HBO for a limited series, and a script was written. The option lapsed, and it is still available. So anyone who would like to pick it up,
we got it out there.
The novel is another novel based on a real history. It's about a midwife and an abortionist who practiced in Manhattan for 40 years, treating women and helping them give birth or end pregnancies that they did not want for a long time. And these were women of the upper classes and the lower classes, and she sold abortifacients, medicines that would help cause a miscarriage. Her name was Madame Restel, and she was quite notorious in her day. So I borrowed part of her story for this novel, My Notorious Life. And now the novel is having a renaissance. It's having another moment, and I wish it were not. And it's because of Dobbs' decision at the Supreme Court, which is really trying to drag women back to those Victorian, medieval, dark days. There's so many similarities between then and now. And so I'm outraged, really, and so sad to see that what has happened and happening, and what could happen if we lose more of our rights to control our families, and women are continued to be dismissed, and women's experience is continued to be dismissed. These are really, this Supreme Court decision has allowed the enactment of what we must now call forced birth laws.
Yes.
These are not just abortion bans. These are laws which force women to carry to term and give birth to children that they do not want, cannot raise, or may not survive. And her experience, her wishes are completely disregarded. So even, and the other way you could look at it is either forced birth or forced child surrender, so that the government is telling women that they must do this. It's the government's decision for a family or for a woman to bring a child into the world, not the woman's decision. And this is, really cannot be allowed to stand. We must all come forward and say, sure, if you want to have a child, it's your right to have a child. But if a woman cannot or will not, does not want to be pregnant, it's her right to terminate that pregnancy. And I can't say it more strongly. And I'm so sorry, knowing what I know about what this was like in the 1800s, and for all of the generations of women before this, when we can't go back there. And women have always had abortions. They find medicines, they find ways, and it's not it's just, we just can't use those old ways now.
No, we can't, but we need to have a voice.
Mhm.
And you have helped. You know, you're such a strong woman yourself. You're so experienced in documentary filmmaking. You hold 2 Emmy Awards. I mean, here we are talking about things which, if I didn't know better, I would swear you're psychic, the way you approach a project. You seem to have a knowing about what needs to be said. And even including White Girl, you know, another really great, interesting book with a completely different perspective. So that leads me to ask you, how much of you is in your female characters here, these strong female characters that you are so good at writing?
Oh, Pam, thank you so much. I mean, when you perform, you put your heart and soul and mind into the character too, but there's a kind of alchemy where you throw your voice or you throw your personality and you think, well, what would it be like if I was her?
Right.
What would it be like if I was him? Why? And maybe this is because my mother used to always tell me, when I would say, oh, so and so is mean to me, and she would say, well, why do you think, what's going on with him or her? What is going on in her life? It's not really about you. It's probably more about him. And so that's a way of empathy. I think fiction writing requires a kind of radical empathy with all your characters, men, women, children, enemies. You do see that nobody's perfect. Leave a little dirt on the shoes of every character. People make mistakes, and even the guy, the mean boss, has a twinkle in his eye and a good sense of humor, and you kind of like him anyway. Even so, you I think that, sure, I worked in a newsroom for many years, and you do put your ear to the ground and you do see things happening, and you do kind of want to be the canary in the coal mine in some ways.
Yeah.
This is happening. This is happening. It's really, important to pay attention.
This is so fantastic. Well, you're helping us pay attention, and you're speaking about that quick eye that Sylvie has, you know? And this is what keeps everyone honest, and I suppose it's what keeps your characters honest and you in your authentic storytelling.
Yeah.
So I gather that we should mention actually that you will be in Greenwich at Greenwich Library on the 17th of November at 7 p.m. If anyone would love to come in and hear you speak, and I believe that is with your publisher or your editor,
Yes,
Cara
the
Watson.
editor. Yeah, my editor, Kara Watson, who I believe grew up in Greenwich. She's a local and has made good in publishing in New York City. And
Excellent.
she and I had drive-by editorial meetings during the pandemic, where she was staying near Binney Park, and
Uh-huh.
I would go meet her there, and we'd sit outside and talk about pages. It was really an
I
interesting
love it. Driving
experience.
up in the cars and
I would take my manuscript in a shopping bag and go, here, drop it off, run 6 feet back, and she'd pick it up. And anyway, it
like
was
a drug run. I love it. I absolutely
exactly.
love it.
Yeah.
And then after that, you're moseying off to Colorado. I
Yeah.
mean, scene of the story. This is really exciting. And you're visiting several places in Colorado, from what I understand.
Yeah, it's a nosebleed tour. I'm gonna be going through. I'm gonna be going through the passes from Denver up into near Aspen and Boulder, and back to Vale, the town where Edwards, where the town of Vale is. But really, I think we haven't yet spoken about some of the labor history that is in the
Yes.
book. And one of the characters I was really drawn to was Mother Jones. She was this fierce labor leader that I didn't know very much about, but she was so beloved by workers. They called her mother. She called them her boys. And she had this very salty vocabulary where she called the wealthy industrialists that she went up against, these to her, they were blood-sucking leeches and
Hmm.
vultures. And, the politicians that they paid off were lapdogs. And, I couldn't resist because, she would nickname these politicians. She called Governor Glasscock of Colorado, she named him Crystal Peter. She called Rockefeller Oily John. I mean, so
Oh my
she
God.
was such a vivid character. So when I find language or characters like that, they find their way into the story because, of course, in the town of Moonstone, a strike is boiling, and
Hmm.
young Sophie must decide, how to navigate the forces that she's up against herself.
That's right. Through love, through passion for family, for the rights of others.
Mhm.
I've got to ask, putting Mother Jones into this, you're putting a historical character into your book, and along with King Leopold. I find this really interesting. Is there a special energy about incorporating a real historical person into a work of fiction?
Yeah, it's tricky because as a novelist, you have a lot of leeway, you have license to make things up and to change things around. So, yes, there are real events and real people that walk in and out of the story. Um, but most of the time, I try to be respectful of dates, times, biographical
Yeah.
details, especially of public figures. And with Mother Jones, the language that her speech in or her talk in the book is almost all drawn from things that she actually said.
I
So
love it. I just love it. It makes it so much, I don't know, it kind of turns on an axis in a certain way, doesn't it?
yeah, it's hard. I mean, you feel drawn to historical events anyway. They help you provide a structure or a material to
Yeah.
feed the story. So,
Yeah. I love that. There's a bit of fancy in that, which I just love.
but I don't
Um,
like it when historical novels have, just heavily crammed with details that make you think,
yeah.
oh God, I'm getting a history lesson. I don't need to know what kind of coal burning stove this was and how many watts in a light bulb or whatever.
No, I get it. I totally get it. So the critics are calling this an epic novel. Would you agree with that? I mean, I guess what is epic, Kate Manning?
I don't know. It encompasses it's a story that encompasses a long arc maybe. It incorporates a lot of ideas, and so yes, it's maybe an adventure that a reader can go on and be immersed in, that will take you on a trip that you can't take yourself. You're sitting in your living room or in your comfortable chair and you're traveling.
Exactly. See, this is what I love about you. You're constant, this open perspective you have all the time. It is so real. It is so touchable. I just adore it. I just adore it. So, where to from here, Kate Manning? I mean, what do you see for the future? Or is that just the great unknown? Do you need like 5 years to get over writing this? And then maybe you'll see a photograph of something and something clicks?
Oh, well, I always have a couple of books percolating in the drawer, actually. And one of them will grab me. There's another one that I have that I think is my next book. It's probably already about 150 pages long, and I'm looking forward to getting back to it. It's another story that I found in our wonderful archives of the past, a woman's story, very little known, but a very fascinating character who had quite a lot of impact on American life. But I'd never heard of her. And then she turned up, when I was sniffing around in file cabinets and books. And I went, whoa, how come I don't know about her? Just the way I never heard about Madame Restel or Sylvia Smith. And so it's really kind of the low hanging fruit of for
Hmm.
novelists. There's a lot of great stories out there that haven't been told, and it's fun to find them and
And leave it to Kate Manning to do it.
use
This
of
is
them.
what I love about you. You're going to find another thing to perk our interest. And you said in the book signing last night, ordinary lives need to be told. There's always a story. I totally agree with that. I always play with the idea of walking out on the street and just saying to anybody, tell me your life, because you and
Yeah.
I know that there is going to be something really deep and really interesting there if we allow it to unfold.
Yeah, well, I hope that you write your own story, Pam, and I hope that people will, because we think, oh, I know that, that's boring. The kids all know that, but they actually don't, I mean, I think my
Yeah.
my father's story is a perfect example. You think you know it, but then you don't if it's not written down. And
Mhm.
so I do think ordinary stories are important. When I was in middle school, my history teacher asked me if I liked history, and I said no, because it's just battles of kings and presidents and memorizing dates of this and that, and it's
Mhm.
boring and there's
Mhm.
no women in it. And he
Mhm.
said, well, women never did anything important.
Oh,
And being an eighth grader, I sort of went, oh, okay. But one of the reasons that maybe he thought that is that none of his textbooks had women's stories in them. And thanks to a generation or two of women's studies departments and women's studies majors and librarians
mhm.
putting uh, original documents and diaries and letters online, and um, looking through them and poring over them, you really begin to see the texture of life. And so
Mhm.
ordinary stories are very important. Um, and
Wow.
it's good to find those.
The textures. I love that. And we need to
Interview
live
your
them in.
grandmother, interview your you know neighbor.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Oh, Kate Manning, you are so interesting all the time. I love it. So tell me this. Do we need to be worried about art right now? Do we need to be worried about someone actually curbing our ability to speak, freely? And do we need to be worried about the future of writers with what's going on in politics right now? It's something that I have to say I think about every day. And I have a genuine feeling that, a big brother is encroaching upon us.
Well, I think you're right to be afraid, and I'm afraid too. I'm a member of an organization called PEN, Poets, Essayists, and Novelists, which is an organization of writers that uh, are activists and organized to protect freedom of speech, freedom to read, protest book bans, which are increasingly seen across the country. Librarians are feeling embattled. School teachers are feeling embattled. There's a very organized effort to uh, infuse fear into
Yes.
conversations about books. And if you know history, you know that in 1933 in Germany, book burning and book banning
Hmm.
was where the Nazi regime went first. They just wanted to destroy art and ideas, performances that could possibly undermine their fascist regime. So when you start to see book bans, when you start to see journalists and writers challenged, when you see someone like Salman Rushdie attacked,
Hmm.
you have to say, this is a big red flag in our culture. And we must learn to trust teachers and doctors and scientists and writers to bring us stories and not feel threatened by them. That's the beauty of freedom of speech, it's the beauty of the First Amendment. And it's always going to be a balance, because now we see hate speech unleashed,
Yeah.
and we see that people are trying to use the First Amendment to argue that, well, they can say anything. And so how do we control that tendency now in American life and American culture? And we must be very, very sharply attuned to it. or we're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, I totally agree. Is there anything that we as artists can do in the meantime, in a much more aggressive way? I mean, should we be out marching on the street, actually, raising everyone's awareness to this if we're only hearing hate in the news and in social media?
Isn't that what you're doing now, Pamela?
Trying.
You have a platform, and I have a platform. If you have one, use it. If you're a parent in the school, don't sit back and say nothing. I think it's always easier to say nothing and to push someone else forward. But we all have a voice, and if marching is what you want to do, make a sign and get out on the street.
Mm-hmm.
If speaking on the radio, if you have a show, do that. If you
Use
write
it.
a book, if you can write a letter to your editor, if you want to go to City Hall and lodge a complaint about something that's going on, mobilize a statute, pay attention to your local down ballot races, be a poll watcher, not because you think the vote is being stolen, but because other people might be trying to intimidate voters and keep them away from the polls.
Right.
As we've seen in many states where voter intimidation and voter suppression is going on. So, your vote is important, and getting out the vote and making sure disenfranchised people have the vote is also deeply important.
As I have kept saying all through the pandemic, we need to wake up.
Yes.
So, well, Kate, I have certainly woken up to your talent, and I love it. I just, wow. And just for fun, we've been so serious. What do you do for a good time when you let go of the writing and you can be out there? What do you maneuver towards?
I dance in my kitchen, Pam.
I love it.
Put the music on and dance around my kitchen. I don't know. I go for a run. I like to go kayaking around the Norwalk Islands.
Mm-hmm.
You might as well be in Maine. It's so beautiful in the Norwalk Islands. And we have a sailboat and we go sailing around.
Brilliant.
So, but I actually like working. I like it. And I like to put a pot of soup on the stove and stir it in between typing. I walk my dog. I play with my dog. My dog can bounce a ball 45 times off her nose. So every day she and I have to rally a little. And, so.
Is she aware of the numbers? Have you taught her?
I count. No, she doesn't. But yeah, my kids are delightful. My family's delightful. I have great friends. So, I like to go for a walk around Central Park or wherever I happen to be, and on a beautiful day. And
this is fantastic.
I'm just lucky. I know that I'm fortunate to be able to do that.
This is fantastic. Listen, before we go, could you just grace us with reading a few lines from Gilded Mountain?
I'd be happy to, if you can tolerate me.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And from the author herself, Kate Manning. All
right. Well, this is because most people haven't read the book. I'll just give you a short, maybe 1 minute paragraph from the opening of the book. Mm-hmm. Gilded Mountain, Chapter 1. I never told a soul about the money. Not a word about the marriage or the events that led me to his arms. In those days, I was a young religieuse, my mother pointing me toward a nunnery. But it was the transformations of love and ease I wanted. And when we went west, I went looking. There in the sharp teeth of the Gilded Mountains, where the snow and murderous cold conspire to ruin a woman, I lost the chance to become a delicate sort of lady, one of those poodles in hair parlors and society clubs. Instead, I got myself arrested as a radical and acquired a fine vocabulary, more common to mule skinners, barflies, quarry hogs, and witches. I'm not sorry, for it was all of my education in those 2 years about right and wrong. Here in the attic of memory, I sit with my trunk of ghosts, my pen to put down those long ago days in Moonstone, Colorado, to report at last certain crimes, my own included, of the heart and worse, and how they tried to smash us. Here we
Wow.
go.
That's an opener. It's a grabber. And she went looking
She did.
right from the beginning. I love
As one
that.
does.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I love Oh, Kate, thank you so much. Because there's nothing more powerful than the words of the author.
Hmm.
Well, I only have one more question for you, my dear.
What's that?
And that is an important one. So, for us to understand who you really are, and believe me, we've gathered that over the past hour. But is there one word or phrase that comes right from your heart which describes who you really are?
Oh gosh, you didn't give me any time to think
No,
about.
I didn't. Hey, you're a
Um,
writer. You're the wordsmith.
I don't know. Ridiculous.
Okay, that's the first ridiculous we've ever had on this show. That is fantastic.
Silly. No, not really. I that's not fair. You should have warned me. Then I could have studied and I could have gone to the dictionary and
And then
but
it wouldn't have been spontaneous, and
yeah.
ridiculous is so adorable. And there is that element of you that dares to be ridiculous all the time and just open and just right on the skin of your teeth. I love it. I love it. Kate Manning, I want to thank you for being on center stage. We're going to watch for Gilded Mountain. Everyone, you should read this indeed epic book, and with this powerful, wonderful woman character who grows by leaps and bounds. And for the betterment of us all, we need to read this book, My Notorious Life and White Girl, all by Kate Manning, author. And Kate, I look forward to seeing you on November 17th at Greenwich Library.
Likewise, likewise. I hope to see a good crowd there.
It will be luminous, I am sure. So
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much, Pamela. I
And
appreciate
everyone out there, please go to katemanningauthor.com to find out more information about Kate and all of her events. And at the same time, I hope you will go to centerstagewithpamelakuhn.com to find a gallery of my shows. And please write to me. I love to hear from my listeners. So in the meantime, thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kate Manning. And this is Pamela Kuhn speaking. Stay safe out there. And like our great heroine here, keep looking. All right? We'll find the truth. This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is now down on Center Stage.